Hello, hello. Well, today I had the amazing pleasure of interviewing Sally Galloway. So, Sally is a seasoned pediatric occupational therapist with 14 years' experience. She's known for her passion in early education advocacy, child development expertise, and a commitment to inclusive practices. As a speaker, not-for-profit founder, and OT Australia Divisional Council delegate, Sally has made a significant impact in the various roles within education, both private and government sectors. Her co-founding of a charity that provides support and programs for children facing adversity, as well as her role as a P&C president and Circle of Security facilitator, highlight her dedication to creating adaptive and supportive environments for children to learn and thrive. Sally's impact extends globally with her work as a national manager of occupational therapy and her presentation at the ECC ERA conference in Budapest, where she shared insights on supporting early education professionals. Currently, Sally is focused on providing practical and accessible training to early learning centres, empowering them to create inclusive environments for all children. Her unwavering commitment to the well-being of children, combined with her extensive experience and expertise, sets her apart as a remarkable advocate for an early education child development. So, our meeting was phenomenal. Let me just say that really quickly, because when Sally and I talked, I actually didn't know the difference between what a pediatric occupational therapist was and what a normal occupation or what an occupational therapist is. So Sally was able to explain that to me and changed the way I looked at the word pediatric, because I always thought pediatric was just babies. And so she was able to correct that thought process for me. And we went further into a whole range of different topics that were fascinating, including where she helped me see that I was being quite black and white in an approach that I take to early childhood education, because I was coming from my personal blueprint, so to speak. And you'll hear it right at the very end where I'm like, oh my goodness, I can see that that's not the only way to deliver early education. So it was a really informative conversation. And when we stopped recording, we talked more and got even further in depth about a whole host of other stuff. And I was kind of wishing that I'd kept recording, because it was really interesting, the things that we talked about. Suffice to say, Sally will be coming back, and we will make another time to have Sally join us. I want to delve into trauma care, trauma-informed childcare, because I think there's a lot of us dealing with a lot of that right now, and we are just so ill-equipped because it's a fairly new topic, or it's not a topic, but a fairly new way of looking at education, but it impacts so many. So I'm very, very keen to have Sally come back. But in the meantime, have a listen to today's podcast. I know you're going to find it as informing and eye-opening and mind-bending as what I did. So without further ado, here is the beautiful Sally Galloway. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sally. It's really lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. We've just met for the first time. Sally and I work together in a business group, and I put a call out for people to come and join us on the podcast, because lots of people that are working in early childhood have just recently joined this business group, the Tina Tao group. And Sally was one of the first ones to put a hand up, which always excites me, because it's a go-getting attitude that you have, most definitely. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you found yourself where you are right now and what led you to being here?
Yeah, thank you, Vic. So yeah, like you said in the intro, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. So have been for 14 years now. And I guess how I got into the early childhood space was in my first year after I graduated. So I always knew I wanted to be an occupational therapist because I had a grandma who was a pioneering woman. She was a physiotherapist. I always thought, oh, maybe I would like to be a physiotherapist, until I kind of looked at what occupational therapy was. And that sort of led me more to that space. But my first position was in a early intervention centre for children with autism, but it was based in a long daycare setting. And so this model was really looked like I worked alongside early childhood educators, teachers, speech pathologists, and myself, but it worked in a transdisciplinary model, meaning that my work, like whoever had the greatest connection, I guess, with the child or the children we were working with, would be the person who would do that work. And so it was really my first step into this place of early childhood and understanding the impact early childhood educators and the sector made. And we were able to create such amazing outcomes, and I learned so much from my early childhood colleagues that, you know, I have now spent the rest of my 14-year degree in this space, and feel really passionate about that, the early years and early intervention.
Yeah, right. It's such an incredible field. Like, don't you find that you learn so much about yourself when you work with children? Like,
totally.
Especially in the early intervention realm as well, because it just teaches you so much more about patients, and then the level of knowledge that you have to uncover and unpack around the different sorts of neurodiversity that are around. It's just phenomenal. And I know you've done some work in the trauma area as well, which I find is just as fascinating. The ability for the body and the brain to be able to process trauma and how that works, but then for children to be in that vulnerable position where they can't control any of what happens to them. And so what we as educators experience is the body's natural way of processing and offloading tension and stress and all that sort of stuff. And then we as educators don't know what's going on. And that trauma-informed care is so important. So pediatric occupational therapy, how is that different to just occupational therapy?
So the word pediatric, it just means is a child. So it means an occupational therapist who works with children and who has had the upskilling. So basically you go through uni, like to get your Bachelor of Occupational Therapy, as an example, is a 4-year degree. But when you graduate, you're a generalist. You can work with, 0 to 100. And that typically is how it is, and all different conditions. But depending on then the job you start to work in and the different professional development courses you engage in, you may we don't say we specialize, because you can't really specialize in Australia for occupational therapy, but that is our interest area. And so that is the area that sort of birth to 5 is the area of which I've stayed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's cool, because I always think of pediatric as babies.
Yeah.
I don't know why, like, it's just babies and that's it. And then we move on to toddlerhood and the world is whole different again.
And maybe because of pediatrician too, the terminology pediatrician, you think, when you see a pediatrician, for the most part, is sort of right in the infancy. And
definitely. So, well, thank you for enlightening me on that.
Not many people know what occupational therapists do. And I've also, tutored at uni and things like that, the occupational therapy course. And I feel like even it's not until 3rd or 4th year when you're in the course that it's kind of like that light bulb moment of, that's what an occupational therapist does. Is.
Okay. So Can you, this might be a hard question to answer, but just go with me.
Yeah.
Can you sort of step us through a bit of a day or a session that you might work with a child so that like educators can get a real clear understanding of, you know, the things that you can offer?
Yeah. Okay, so to answer that, I'll just define really what occupational therapy is. And so when we think about occupational therapy and how it may differ or kind of work alongside other therapies like your speech therapy, physiotherapy, psychology, and things like that, is occupational therapy. Occupation means meaningful activity. So often when I say I'm an occupational therapist, people think about paid employment, like getting, you know, occupational rehab or things like that, right? That makes actual more sense. Then, you know, occupation means meaningful activity. And so where like occupational therapy was born around that World War II era, and it really came from like nurses who were rehabilitating patients through meaningful activities. So rather than simply exercises that you may get to work on a certain muscle or whatever it might be, it was more through the activity of, like, we're commonly known as basket weavers, you know, back in the day, in the sense that we would do our therapy through a meaningful activity like basket weaving or whatever it might be. And so where the science comes from, and the research and the literature to form up occupational therapy, it's really around the art, like it's an art form and science of meaningful activities. So our actual intervention, like when we're having a therapeutic approach for children or trying to shift the dial, whether that is children or adults, it is around an activity. So you often see us very much like early childhood educators, like engaging and supporting children to achieve their goals through play and through playfulness. And then, and with also the goal, the end goal being the meaningful activity too. So we talk about as like a means and the end. So the therapeutic approach is through the activity for the goal of achieving the performance in the activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where does that come in? So if an educator observes that a child might have a delay in walking, or what are the scenarios in which OT would be coming into a service and assisting a child?
Yeah, so our focus is really on a child's participation. And I know that's somewhat of a big word, a buzzword, not big word, buzzword at the moment, but it's performance and participation. These two words have been embedded in the work we've done always. So our main focus is in, can this child do or engage in what they like need to be able to do, want to be able to do, or have to do. So we would look at things like, and we would call occupations being like a child's main occupation, and thing that they really need to be great at is play, right? And so as an educator, if you were noticing that this, a child was within your service and really having great difficulties engaging in play, any type of play that you would typically be expecting them to be engaging in at that time, that might be where you would do your critical reflections, have a conversation with family, and that might be where you would like an occupational therapist to come in and give some advice on that. Then you have your self-care activities, so that might look like more things like toileting, feeding, sleeping, those sorts of things. And then when you're getting, children more in that transition to school period, or more school-age children, if you run after school care and things like that, it would be children who have real, more difficulties engaging in more of those school-based activities like writing, like handwriting, or being able to just attend to the academic tasks that they're expected to for any sort of duration of time. So they're the sort of occupations that we really look at and focus on.
Okay. So, and this is where it becomes critical for educators to be able to have a body of evidence behind them when they're raising these concerns with families. Because one way I teach educators to be able to utilise their documentation in a meaningful and professional manner is to use the milestone checklists.
Yes.
Because they are a great resource. They are non-confrontational for anybody, because I think the biggest challenge a lot of educators face, particularly in family daycare, is that parents don't seem to always listen when an educator says, I think we've got some red flags happening here.
Totally.
It's very different in a long daycare setting, because the director, has a little bit of clout. That's the wrong word, but you know what I'm getting at. When it comes, there's a little, or there might be a ECT there, and so parents might be more inclined to listen to someone who's university trained, although we know there isn't any difference in acknowledging and observing red flags. So totally lost my train of thought as to where I was going with that question, but I think I was going to ask you how we can start those. Oh no, that's what I was talking about. That idea of completing your documentation and having that meaningful documentation behind you, because that means that it's easy to then say, well, I observed on such and such a date, I'm kind of looking in this range of window that your child will be able to engage in creative play around this time, and I've been looking for this for about 6 months and I'm not seeing any of that just yet. They'll play on their own, but it's playing with their peers is what I'm actually looking for, and I'm not seeing it. How does your child do this at home? Do you have other children that you play with, blah blah blah, and building that bigger picture, because when a parent then does decide to take that information and go further, that's really helpful for you, isn't it, as a OT?
Oh yeah, it's really really helpful for me. But I want to backtrack, because I think you made a few really important points, right? So one,
good, because that was so long-winded and went nowhere.
So I think what is really interesting, so for the last, up until I think it was February last year, I had spent the last 7 years as the National Manager for Occupational Therapy within Good Start Early Learning. So within a long daycare scenario, which I'm well aware is quite different to family daycare. But what I can say is that similarity between having that conversation, whether you are a Cert 3 educator, ECT, or a director, it doesn't make it any easier. But just in that long daycare scenario, I guess you have the backing of more people, right, to sort of have those conversations and to validate what you're talking about. But what I often talk to early childhood educators about around having those critical conversations with families is how much, and I'm sure you talk about this too, but how much that conversation starts long before, you bring up the specific issue, like that relationship, how you're building that relationship with the family. And you have such an incredible opportunity in family daycare to be, having much less children, and you are that point of contact and point of expertise. But how you're demonstrating your expertise in the way in which you're displaying your programming, the way you are feeding back to the family about what is happening through the day, and that starts to build that credibility and understanding for the parents to understand, hey, this is an early childhood professional, and they actually, that they're knowing what they're talking about. They're giving me this feedback, and meaning that, as an early childhood educator, I think that gives you opportunity much sooner, rather than needing to necessarily wait for 6 months to give that feedback with all of this data of being able to say, a few weeks in, hey, I have been testing this and trialing this, and Johnny is having difficulties engaging in play with their peer. I'm trying to work out, is that just in this environment, or what's going on for home? Oh, okay, maybe we'll revisit that in a couple of weeks, sort of thing. And being able to have that conversation.
See, this is the importance of forward planning and intentional teaching.
Yes.
And this is like quite controversial sometimes, and people are like, but it's a child-led program, you can't plan 12 weeks in advance. And I'm like, well, you can, because you use these goals and you use the knowledge of the child, the prior knowledge of the child that you have, and when you combine that with like the milestone checklist, if you're just starting out with this process, when you combine those two pieces of information together, it can give you a roadmap 12 months in advance. Like you literally could plan things 12 months in advance. We're obviously not going to be that, I was going to say the A word, pardon me, but I'm aware some educators listen to this podcast. I've got children, so retentive, let's say retentive. We won't be so retentive as to go 12 months in advance, but when you're planning 12 weeks in advance, it gives you opportunity to invite parents to contribute to this goal setting process. And you can say to them, and we've got documents that educators, when they join our 12-week planning program, they get access to, where you can say to a parent, okay, I'm getting ready to plan for winter, sort of in mid-May or whenever it is, I'm getting ready to plan for winter. These are the goals I've identified that I want to work with your child on. Are there goals that you have at home? Are these in alignment with what you're experiencing at home? Because quite often they will be in alignment. Your parent will be like, oh my goodness, just get dressed in the morning, for goodness sake, like I'm trying to get out the door. And my teenager is just like not playing, so then it opens that conversation where we can be going, okay, we'll start working on that here in kindy. That will be our goal, is to help your little one to be able to put their jacket on by themselves by the end of winter, in time for them to not need to wear it anymore, and then us have to teach them how not to put their jacket on anymore.
Yes, absolutely.
So I can see how that really works symbiotically, because it also opens the door, when using the milestone checklists, to have a non-confrontational conversation with the parent, because you could get them their own checklist that you send home with them to say, hey, can you just check this off? I want to see that you're seeing the same things that I'm seeing. And you can operate those two together and have your family, really engaged in what you're doing for their particular child together. And it is that relationship building. It's so vitally important. But when educators want to be seen as professional, they have to do these professional things and be organised and planned and consistent in their approach. So what is it that, oh, sorry. Yep.
No, I was just going to say, and families appreciate that so much. I know you can be nervous of the initial reaction, but, over time, and this is why I absolutely love working in partnership with early childhood educators, because I truly think that they're the people that make the biggest difference in a child's life. And they're the people who have the touch points. And this is a big reason for me why I don't so much work in a traditional therapeutic model where I see a child once a week or once a fortnight for an hour and that is it. I like to work in a model that works in collaboration with the people who support the child the most. And, when a child is engaged in family daycare, early education and care with an early childhood educator, they're with them all throughout that a whole day. And so they have these multiple touch points to be implementing really simple strategies that totally make a difference, and with the families as well, much like they become that sort of extension of their family and their trusted village. And so it's just, I just think what you're talking about, bringing some visual, like as in that the checklist as an example, and that collaborative conversation around planning what you're working towards, that's all relationship building, and that's all really supportive of if when you're noticing things might not be tracking, as typically for that particular child, and you've already got that in, and that soft landing point for a parent to be able to feel really supported as they go through that diagnostic process or investigating what's going on for the child.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I can't remember who told me, but through the pandemic, there was a significant shift in trust, in that parents now trust their early childhood educator with knowledge building and fact finding on their children more than they do their GP.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, 100%. And like it's it's a no-brainer to me, because we spend more than 15 minutes or 10 minutes with that parent.
Yes.
We know their child's name and we are with their child. So they want to inherently have that beautiful connection with their educator, because their educator sometimes spends more time with their child than they do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it makes sense that we need to really foster these beautiful relationships. And that's what I think one of the absolute benefits of family daycare is because you've got the same educator there from when the child arrives to when they leave. Yeah. It also gives you, as a family daycare educator, a more intimate relationship with that child, because there is no separation in the day for you. You don't get to change shift. You don't just, see ya, go home, my shift is finished. You don't spend the last hour going, oh, I'm going to bail, and just switch off. You've still got to be present with the children. And yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I really like that will flow in for and have benefit for you. So what other things do you think family daycare educators can do to notice when they could possibly be suggesting occupational therapy, or is there places they can go to find more information out? Because I think sometimes that's one of the biggest things, is that children don't know how to integrate into play.
Yes.
It's a bit of an art form in teaching how to integrate into play too, especially when there's so many different neuro stuff going on nowadays. Was that even really a question?
Yeah. So yeah.
Sorry.
So around the finding occupational therapy, but I think again, you just touched on. So I'm a circle of security trainer and facilitator, and I love that attachment work, and it really underpins everything that I do and that I teach and that I support early childhood educators with. And one of the biggest challenges in the long daycare setting, I suppose, is the change. We talk about primary educators and that primary attachment figure of the fact that there is such a high turnover in the industry currently, or changes of staff and things like that. So immediately in family daycare, you have this one attachment figure for the child, that's secondary to the family, right? But sometimes it might actually be, depending on the circumstance. And when we're talking about children who are experiencing or have neurodiversities or have experienced trauma and things like that, you've already laid the foundation, like, of just creating that strong, connected, safe relationship. And so when we're thinking about how we can support children then to develop, the different skills that they need, or connect into these different play experiences, you already have the basis, you already have safety, you already have trust, which makes it, a lot easier to go into that space. And also you have a lot more understanding of the whole play cycle, as an example, and a lot more freedom and less distraction for like that really deep play or deep work for children to happen, because you have the time, you have the space. So when we're thinking then about, okay, well, then how do we support these children further, and how may we refer to an occupational therapist or have an occupational therapist come into our setting to support these children? Like for me, and I guess the way, I work is more working alongside the early childhood educator to support them in how they're programming, how they're planning, how they're talking to children. We often do things like videoing the play scenario, or putting, I've done it, the situation before where we put a time lapse sort of on the camera of the room, and just be able to monitor, how the children are moving through, how long the educator is sitting and engaging with the child, what sort of things they're engaging with. And together, we can reflect on that type of practice and look at how we can support that child to further advance those skills. So that's the type of way I would work. But if you are a family daycare educator and you're noticing sort of some red flags and you're thinking you would like some further support and advice after you've had that, well, there are two ways. One, I personally will have a course launching soon that will have, it's all around regulation rituals, and it's all about the things you can do every day to embed into the work that you're already doing, and the things you can kind of look for and support, and the way you can structure activities to support children and scaffold their learning. And so that's something from a professional development point of view, and upskilling.
Yep.
But if you're wanting individual support for individual children, it begins in that conversation with the family about, what does that look like, and how we are really lucky at this very moment in time with the NDIS and early childhood, early intervention scheme, because that means that children need, like, the criteria to get funding now means that a child doesn't need a diagnosis. It means a child needs a delay in 2 or more domains to be able to access that funding. And as an early childhood educator, your documentation and what you have been able to observe really means a lot in the case for a family to be able to gain funding. And you also can make the referral on the ECEI once you've had the conversation with the family, of course, and gain consent. You can make the referral on the website, which will allow that family to go into a sort of a planning meeting discussion about what their child needs to get that early intervention and support before reaching that age of 7. So when that brain is the most plastic and available to, really be supported. And then that helps the family to access the funding and access that therapeutic support that they need, right? Which is a game changer. Since this has been available a lot more and been a lot more accessible, I have found that, I am working a lot more with children and working in collaboration in this partnership model with all the professionals involved, and really closely with their early childhood educator. And we're finding that by the time they get to 7, they've had a smooth transition to school. They no longer, there's not necessarily a need for a bigger diagnosis or ongoing funding. And that's the point. The point is to get that early intervention support then and go from there, which also, when you're having those conversations about the red flags and the conversations with families, makes it more important than ever to have those conversations early, to be really transparent with it, and really being able to have that conversation with families. Like, I'm telling you this now because there is opportunity for you to access this support as well. And it might, and I don't know, I find that to be a really soft entry point when families know that, because sometimes the hesitation is like, oh my gosh, 200, how would I pay $200 for a therapy session? Or then the pediatricians, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and this, that, and the other. But if you kind of come armed as well with the options, and how they can access this,
Yeah.
then that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because as a service provider myself, I've not heard of that website that you mentioned. We've always gone through inclusion support, and maybe that's who it is that you're talking about, the KU inclusion support.
No, so you've got two different things. So you've got inclusion support, so KU, and that would provide you with the hands-on support in the learning environment for inclusive practices, and if you would be eligible for additional funding and things, which family daycare seem to get left out of that bucket a little bit, but
surprise.
But the ECI, like early childhood, early intervention, that's more parent facing, like the parent gets that funding, but we can support them to go through that, and we can also make the referral.
Okay. We might talk about.
We can link that. Yeah,
that would be great. Put that in the show notes, because I know if educators could start that process quicker and not have to say you'll need to book into your doctor and blah 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 blah, that will quite often be a hurdle that some people, it will help them get over. It also then arms educators with the ability to be able to say, hey, I can help you do this, and they can go and do it, which would be super incredible. Because I know sometimes it's just that whole thing of people don't put these ideas forward because they don't actually understand the process themselves.
100%.
Or it's really freaking convoluted, like trying to get anything done with the inclusion support. Like there's funding there that we can access, but the whole process to do it is just like, poke me in the eye with a rusty fork. Like it's just so difficult, and it can't be used for training. And it's just like, oh my gosh, every example they give you is a training example.
Yes.
And it's not.
Are you referring to like innovative solutions?
Yes.
Funding? Yes, that is very. I have delivered a few innovative solution cases, and it isn't easy to get that funding.
And that's literally the only avenue open to family daycare educators that we could potentially get any kind of funding, because the government, in its infinite wisdom, took it all away from us. So, and quite often there isn't enough within a family daycare service to be able to fund all the children that require all this additional help. You know, their idea of giving us support when we've got a neurodiverse child or a child that's got higher needs in our service is to say, okay, well, we'll pay for a spot so you only have 3 children on that day instead of 4. Yet what they pay doesn't even cover the cost of that spot that they're asking you to give up. So
they pay the subsidy.
They pay a nominal amount per hour for that spot, and it might be like, I don't know, $10 an hour or something. It doesn't even, like most educators are charging, and if you are not charging more than that, you need to charge at least the CCS cap. And I don't care what your service tells you, you charge at least the CCS cap. Anyway, it doesn't even cover that, and it's like, well, you're asking an educator to work with a child that has more difficult circumstances. So it takes more brain capacity, patience, skill set from you, the educator. It costs you more energetically to work with these children. And that's not a negative. It's just what it is. And then they're asking you to take a pay cut. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And then you get the do-gooders. Oh, you can't ask children to leave a service just because they have a different set of, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual needs. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Where am I in this picture too, And so I think, it just comes straight back to this idea that your documentation is so vital in this scenario, and it sets you up to be able to help the children and the families be able to access the help that you all need to have a better outcome for this child, because this is what we're all here for. We're all here for the betterment of the children, the highest goods of the highest needs of the children. So this is really valuable information, Sally, that I am so gobsmacked that I'm learning after 10 years, because you just don't know what you don't know,
And I think, and for what you were just saying then about, it's such an important part, especially when you're working by yourself in this scenario, like you're working by yourself as the family daycare educator. And so what you're talking about around, the do-gooders wanting to, we can't exclude children, as an example, I'm using air quotations. I'm absolutely for like inclusion. Like that is what I'm about. And part of that, what I recognize is that each individual has different capabilities to support that inclusion, right?
Yep.
And so if you're a family daycare educator and you have, you're supporting a child with needs that you don't know how to meet, right? And you're there alone and you're trying your hardest to support that, and you don't have the support network around you, you don't have the help, you don't have the skills or capacity because you have never worked with a child like this before, and you don't have the training, right? You haven't had the coaching and the mentoring to do that. Like, that's not serving anyone either, right? It's not supporting that child, and it's not supporting the other children in your care. And so that's why I really do feel passionate about what I do and the space I'm in and what I want to be able to offer educators, because I don't want educators to feel that way. I want them, I want true inclusion to be able to happen. And for that to be able to happen, there needs to be access to the people who have the knowledge to coach and to mentor, to support them. So then suddenly it's easy. Suddenly they know what experiences to set up for those children. They suddenly can offer themselves more self-compassion about what they are truly doing for that child every day, and not beat them. Because often it's more around the fact that they end the day and they feel like, oh, little Johnny didn't engage in all of those activities, or, oh, I didn't meet Johnny's needs and I just feel like a failure. Like I feel like I wasn't doing, his job. But like, you need someone to be able to sense check that with, and knowing what is enough and what you are doing and what goals you're working on and what's appropriate to work on, to really have that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in what you do. So it's a really interesting part.
Say it louder from the back, please, for those in the back to hear, because that is exactly what happens. Is you'll see people will put a post out and will be like, oh, I'm really struggling with this behavior. And now it's getting to the point where I'm completely triggered by it. Like, they may not be saying that, but you can read between the lines and you can go, oh, you're hating this experience right now. Like, you've got nothing to offer. And what's happening now is that you're feeling resentful of this child. This child is presenting with a complex set of unmet needs, and it's coming out in a behavior that's undesirable. However, your skill set is, 0 to 10, your skill set dealing with that is sitting at around a 4, and you've exhausted everything you've already got. Now this child is ramping up to a level, level 10, because their need is not getting met. There's something going on underneath there, and you lack the ability, and it's not a judgment or a criticism.
No.
But you lack the ability to mine and excavate what's actually going on there, because, you might have 10 years of experience, but this whole trauma-informed care that's around now, which is so important because we know the generational trauma is just compounding and coming down and the line, and it's being unhealed. And then these children who are coming to us now are so much more expressive in how they share that. But if you aren't trauma-informed, educated yourself, there's no way you can even scratch that surface. So sometimes it is better to say, I've come to the point where I actually don't think I can meet your child's needs. I don't have the skill set to be able to work with your little one. I love them dearly. Like, I really appreciate them, but my skill set isn't where it should be. It's almost the equivalent of going to a podiatrist to deal with pregnancy.
Mm, mm,
Like, that's
mm.
literally the set of skills that you have are specific to what you like to fundamentally work with. And that's not to say that it's bad. And, I just think people need to be able to advocate for themselves more frequently and be more empowered around that, to be like, am I a gynecologist or am I a podiatrist? Why did I choose those two examples? Do not ask me. But
And I think, like, so this happens all the time, and sometimes it blows people's minds when you think about when I've like talk to a group of early childhood educators in a centre-based setting, but saying things like, you're not going to like every child, right? And what I mean by that is that what you're describing is, a child who has needs that, I don't know how to meet. I try and meet them. I cause a rupture. I try and repair, or maybe I don't try and repair, but I've caused a rupture. Then I cause another rupture. Then I cause another rupture. And not only does that affect that child's ability to connect and be in relationship with me, it affects my ability to be in relationship with them. And then we start to have this cycle, and we start to get anxious when they're going to even walk through the door, and all of those sorts of things. In the long daycare setting, as a scenario, you have multiple educators. And one of the recommendations I make in that scenario is that children, if you are noticing that with a child, if you are noticing you have had so many ruptures in that relationship, if you're working to a key educator model, as an example, we need to swap that key educator. We need to tap a new, fresh-faced, enthusiastic educator who has not had that relationship history with that child, and create a new ability to connect with that child and be really conscious and understanding of, their triggers, their needs, the things that they enjoy, and have that educator more suited to that. So, in the long daycare setting, as a scenario, if there is an educator who prefers more of your indoor activities, really loves expressive book reading, really loves block play, really loves that kind of thing, but then the child really loves climbing, rough and tumble play, rough housing, and the educator that sort of they're paired with is more risk adverse and really that's not their jam. Like, don't put, we need to match the educator with that. And so I think for family daycares, like even, the community you have and what you offer, knowing who's in your area too, like that is so important. Like, so knowing not only what other family daycares are available, what skill sets those family daycares have and experiences they have, and then what long daycares and kindergartens are available, and what other support, programs are available too. So when you're having that conversation with the family and really being upfront about what your skills and your capacities are, and you might be at a time in your career and your life where you're like totally open to learning more and wanting to explore that more and upskill and get that support, which I would highly encourage. But there are times in your life where you've got other things going on, and that's just not what's within reach. It's like, well, who can I refer to as well? How can I support this family in really being supported in another service that has these skills and capabilities?
That's such a great way of framing community connection.
Yeah.
I can stand here hand on heart and say I've never looked at community connection. I've always kind of gone, oh, community connection, like some of what we've done in the past to have community connection could be considered box ticking. Just because there's so much to do in one day. Anyway, but that is a really lovely way of framing getting to know your community. And it could even be very well that you do look up the services in your region and get in touch with them and say, hey, just wondering what your strengths are, what you think your strengths are as a service, because sometimes I might need to refer families to your service. If I know there's a preschool down the road from me that does nature. They go to the creek behind their daycare centre, so they do that once or twice a week or whatever it is, and they'll quite often do forest school training there and stuff. So for me, I'm lucky where I am. I did excursions to the park every week, and we bush bashed and blah blah blah. But then in this conversation, I'm recalling this little fellow that I had that I persevered with for ages, to the point where I was like, I so hate Tuesday, Wednesdays. Like, I'm just not enjoying my work now because this little guy is just pushing all of my buttons, and it's really frustrating. So he didn't really engage in that outdoor play. He would have been better suited to a place that spent more time indoors, because he was quite soft and gentle, and that was just what he was like. So I can see now, and I hope everyone else had the same thought process that I did as you were talking about that. It was just like, community connections are so really important here. And how can I, as an educator, facilitate that, or ask my service provider to facilitate that? So this is where it's really important that you have connection with the other educators in your service. In family daycare, it's quite unique because you could be the only educator in your area, and that's something challenging to get over. But then I think reach out to the long daycare services in your area. If you're in a small area, you're probably all going to know each other anyway. So make those collaborations, because it's important, because they might refer people to you too at some point as well. So I think
that that's really why also, when we talk about critical reflections and, having professional mentors and having, why that is so important for all of us to have that person to check yourself with, and to help you see those other possibilities and reframe things that way, different ways. So, yourself even noticing, hey, this little guy is pushing my buttons. Well, what are those buttons? How do I, before maybe needing to reach out and support him in transitioning to a different service? Well, what's going on for me as well? What's going on for me that's happening? Is that something that I can work on, or is that something, having those critical reflections too around what that might look like, how you could trial different things, and then working in partnership with the family and bringing them into that, because they might say the same, he totally pushes my buttons too, and I'm finding it difficult. So together we can have this collaborative conversation, right?
Yeah. And look, I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again. Very unpopular opinion. Sometimes you meet children you just don't like, straight up. And there's no difference between, because I meet heaps of adults that I just think, you are not my people.
There are people who are not your people.
And it's totally okay. And I think there's this big thing that we have to be accepting of anybody and everybody within our services. And it's really important for family daycare educators to have boundaries around that, because these people are coming into your home. It's not your job to save people either. This is a really important part of the interviewing process. And you can garner so much information from families and their willingness to work with you by asking smart questions in that interview process. So there's lots of things that we've touched on today that I go far out. It comes back to your documentation. It comes back to having a style of documentation that you can look back on and then traject you forwards further. But you can always come back to these things. We have to be able to have a system of documentation that allows you to be able to be open with the families, but back yourself with the information that you're saying. And if you're this educator that's like, but it's all in my head, well, that's not going to work necessarily in a family daycare setting, because in a long daycare setting, you can bounce these ideas off and someone there will be a note taker and be putting this information down and giving you the steps to follow and blah, blah, blah. In family daycare, you're on your Pat Malone, you've got to do it yourself. So yeah, it's really important to have that documentation system. And the other thing that's coming up again and again through this conversation is being brave enough to own your limitations.
Yeah.
Like plain
and to
simple.
know them. Like, first of all, to know them and accept them.
Yeah.
And then and be transparent. Like, we're all human. And so connecting in that way. Yeah.
Oh, Sally, this has been so good. I have just learned so much from this conversation. How can people find you to follow more of what you're about? Because I think there's going to be a whole heap of people that are going to head over to your website and want to get to know you more.
Yeah, so you can just find me at sallygalloway.com.au. And on there, I actually have like a little booklet, like 10 tips to calm for early learning. So it's just 10 simple, tips of ways you can create a sense of calm within your environment. And that's absolutely applicable to the family daycare environment as well. So you can jump on there and grab that. I'll be running a free webinar that will go into that a little bit more, and understanding your sensory preferences personally and understanding the children's and what that looks like in the early learning environment. So you can, I know you were talking about you work a lot to rhythms, and I do that too, rhythms and rituals across the day. So how you can structure those to really, create this sense of calm and for both yourself and the children. So yeah, that's the best way to connect.
We're speaking the same language, Sally. It's so good.
Awesome.
Because I talk about all those things as well in depth, and I feel like people must just get so sick of me banging on about clear the clutter, like don't have so much visual noise in your environment, because I walk into some places, I'm undiagnosed inattentive ADHD, but I walk into some places and I'm like, like it just does things to my body straight away. Whereas then there's other environments that I walk into and I'm like, my body actually relaxes and my nervous system feels more peace and at ease than any time of the day prior, and it's just all around in how things are set up and the colors and the tones and the noise. When people have constant noise in the background, like they don't understand that children have to filter that. Their brain has to devote some of its energy to processing that constant noise and archiving it somewhere instead of focusing on the learning that's happening in their hands, so
I think that's so interesting what you're talking about, because what we talk about is your individual sensory profile. So it's super interesting, like from your perspective, for you to say, like, I really need it to be quiet to be able to focus. Yet there will be someone else who cannot focus if it is quiet. And so that is a piece that, I really go into, is understanding. I know it's so interesting and it kind of blows your mind a little, of thinking and understanding how you can analyze your own sensory preferences and own sensory needs and how you can communicate those to others, and understanding the children's unique sensory needs too. So then when you set up that environment, it is unique. So sometimes we have these blanket rules around things, which totally makes sense maybe to the majority, like, but then there's people, and I'm sure there'll be listeners who are like, are you kidding? Like, if the morning show is not on when I wake up, like, I don't know who I am. Like, I need that background TV noise, or I need the loud music on the car on the way, to the gym or to work or whatever it might be, to get me activated, and others need just complete silence. Some people, and so that's the piece that I go into a little bit more.
That is so funny, because do you know the music that I've discovered this week? And I'm going to sound like a total lunatic, but I've discovered Australian bird sounds.
Yes.
And I've been working all week to the sound of Australian bird sounds on my speaker behind me. And I have become like super productive, so much more able to focus because there's the sounds of the little wrens and the cockatoos and the magpies and all that stuff going on around me. It's like there's enough, it's just enough for my brain to have a little bit of focus back there, but allow me to focus here as well. And
so you activate the cognitive functions that you need.
Yeah. And it's not distracting. Like it's just, for me, it's not distracting. That is so funny because I just thought I'd stumbled upon something really great. Now I understand it's my profile. And my profile is Mother Nature, obviously.
Totally.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, maybe we need to do a podcast just on that kind of thing. We can. I know that there's people that are completely repelled by the things that I teach because they're like, no music. Oh my God, no, you're so old school and retentive around stuff like that. But I don't know.
Sometimes it's just not black and white, right? Yeah. Like, because we are so unique. So you might feel that, having it quiet is the most, supportive thing. But then others gain so much energy from the music, right? Or whatever it might be. Obviously it has to be appropriate music when you're thinking about children and thinking about their needs too. But kind of also when you can frame it in that way, when you're working with educators and children, of what is your unique needs? Okay, how can we meet these needs? And especially in a group setting where we need to meet multiple different needs. So how do we do that? And what does that look like? And it can be done, right?
Don't get me wrong. We did like Justine Clark, we would have those periods and then we'd be outside and we'd be working. The children always make enough noise anyway. I think maybe we need to have a podcast just on this, Sal.
We can.
I think this is so interesting to me. Further understanding, and again it comes back to when an educator knows that about themselves, they can say that to families, because I would totally be saying to families, look, I don't have background music on during the day. I think there's enough sound going on for us to be able to process just that. If the children want to dance and put some music on, we do that. But it's not something that I have in the background. And they might go, oh, we always do. And then it gives you cues and understanding, because if that child is their child is particularly highly strung, it could be that you need to have that period where they arrive where there's something happening. And then you may be able to wind that down and then build it back up later on and wind it back down so that you're meeting everybody's needs. But if that's one little thing that can help a child settle in, again, it comes down to quality questions in your interview. So, Oh, look at my brain pinging on all these other things that I can do now for family daycare educators. But steady on, Victoria, hold your horses.
There's always more time.
There is always more time. Oh, Sally, this has been so insightful and enlightening. Thank you. I did not have any clue that our conversation was going to go here today, and I'm so grateful and thankful. So thank you so much for joining us on the Big Heart podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to coming back and talking about all things sensory.
No, thank you so much, Sally. I really appreciate your time. Have a great day.
I will. Thank you.